"You've become a relic with a title we can't afford anymore." Those words, from an all-staff email sent by Dr. Victor Vance, felt like a brand on my computer screen. My hands were shaking as I reread the announcement, which had gone out to all 300-plus hospital employees. "After careful consideration of our financial outlook," the email read, "I've made the difficult decision to eliminate several administrative positions." And then came the part that hit me like a gut punch. This includes the role of senior hospital administrator currently held by Laura Sterling. He then tried to soften the blow with a backhanded compliment. "While we appreciate her 18 years of service, Northwood Memorial needs fresh perspectives to navigate today's healthcare challenges." But the next line was just a straight-up, brutal attack. "Gina is stuck in the past, resistant to innovation, and preventing us from implementing necessary changes." I sank back into my chair, absolutely floored by the public humiliation of it all. He didn't even spell my name right. Nobody had ever called me Gina. The personal dig was so completely unprofessional, but honestly, that was just par for the course with Dr. Vance. "My name is Laura Sterling. I'm 44, and until this morning, I was the senior hospital administrator at Northwood Memorial Hospital in Portland, Oregon. I'd given my entire career to that place, starting from an entry-level job and working my way up. I'd survived budget cuts, staffing shortages, and 3 major leadership changes. But nothing could have prepared me for this. A soft knock on my door startled me. It was Chloe, my assistant, and her eyes were wide with worry. "Laura, I'm so sorry. This is awful." "He can't just—" "He can," I interrupted, taking a shaky breath. "As chief medical director, he's got the authority to reorganize the administration." A part of me wasn't even surprised. I knew something was up when he'd canceled our last 3 meetings. Dr. Vance had only been here for 6 months, arriving with all these big promises and an impressive resume. He talked a good game about innovations and efficiencies, but never seemed to care how our hospital actually ran. His very first move was to get rid of free staff parking. His second was cutting back on nursing coverage for the night shifts. "What are you going to do?" Chloe's voice was barely a whisper. I looked around my office, taking in the framed certificates on the wall, the photos of my family, and the binders on my shelf, all meticulously labeled with titles like safety protocols and violations. Those binders held 18 years of documented safety concerns, staffing issues, and policy violations. Some had been resolved, many hadn't. "I'll be fine," I said, a strange sense of calm washing over me. Sometimes, being underestimated is a real advantage. I stood up and began packing my personal things, leaving the binders exactly where they were. I already had digital copies of everything. When security came to escort me out, another one of Vance's little power moves, I was ready. I smiled, picked up my box of personal belongings, and walked out with my head held high. That evening, I made a single call. It was to Eleanor Hayes, a former board member who had retired the previous year. She had been my mentor when I first started at Northwood and had become a dear friend. "He did what?" Eleanor's voice was filled with outrage when I told her about the email. "Laura, that's grounds for a defamation suit." "Maybe," I said, pouring myself a glass of wine as I sat in my darkened living room. "But that's not the path I want to take." I explained to Eleanor how Dr. Vance had been systematically dismantling our safety protocols over the last 6 months. He'd lowered the nurse-to-patient ratios on the oncology and pediatric floors and had extended surgical staff shifts past what was considered safe. He'd even stretched out the equipment maintenance schedule to save a buck. "The problem is," I continued, "he's been smart about it. Each change is presented as temporary or justified by some made-up industry trend he's misinterpreting. The board only sees the cost savings, they don't see the risks." "And I'm guessing you've documented all of this," Eleanor said, not even as a question. "Every incident, every complaint, every near miss," I confirmed. "I've been building these files since my first day at Northwood. 3 hospital directors before Vance have tried to cut corners, and I've always had the evidence to show why it wouldn't work." What I didn't tell Eleanor was how personal this all was. 20 years ago, my mom had been a patient at Northwood. A medication error combined with an understaffed night shift had caused complications that extended her stay by weeks. That experience was what had led me to pursue a career in hospital administration, to be the person who made sure those kinds of mistakes didn't happen to other people. I gave up everything for that hospital, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Relationships, starting a family, vacations. I really believed I was making a difference. You were, Eleanor insisted. And you still can. She then asked the question that had been rattling around in my head all evening. So, what do you want to happen now? I took another sip of wine, weighing my options. I could walk away with the severance package and find a new job. I could file a wrongful termination lawsuit. I could retire early, just as Vance had intended. Or I could fight. I want to protect the patients, I said finally, and the staff who are being pushed to their limits. But I need to be smart about this. Smart, Eleanor agreed. Right now, Vance has the board's ear. But that can change in a hurry if the right information comes out. I glanced at my laptop, thinking about the files I'd been keeping. All those years of documented safety violations, staffing issues, and policy breaches. It was concrete evidence that couldn't be dismissed as the complaints of a bitter former employee. Give me a few days, I said. I need to organize my thoughts and my evidence. 3 days after my humiliating dismissal, I was sitting at my dining room table surrounded by printouts of emails, policy documents, and incident reports. I'd spend hours organizing the most compelling evidence of the safety violations that had occurred under Dr. Vance's short tenure. My phone buzzed with a text from Hannah Reed, the night shift charge nurse in the emergency department. You wouldn't believe what happened last night, it read. 2 nurses called out sick and weren't replaced. We were at dangerously low staffing levels all night. A patient with chest pain waited 4 hours to be seen. Vance says it's the new normal, and we just need to adapt. I immediately added this new information to my growing file. It wasn't just individual stories anymore. The numbers showed a clear and frightening pattern. Incident reports had gone up by 37% since Vance took over. Near misses, potential errors caught before they could harm a patient, were up 42%. Staff turnover had doubled. My doorbell rang, pulling me out of my focus work. I opened it to find Chloe standing there with a takeout bag. I just figured you weren't eating properly, Chloe said, breezing past me into the kitchen with a takeout bag. And I've got some updates for you, too. As she started unpacking containers of Thai food, she gave me the rundown on the chaos at Northwood. Vance announced your replacement today, she said. It's his old colleague from Chicago, a guy named Marcus Thorne. Doesn't have any experience in healthcare administration, but he's apparently a visionary in healthcare economics. Translation, I snorted. He knows how to slash costs no matter the consequences. Exactly, Chloe nodded. Oh, and they're rolling out a new staffing model next week. Nurses will be handling more patients, and they're cutting hours for support staff. Did anyone bring up their concerns? I asked, already pretty sure I knew the answer. Margaret from nursing tried to, Chloe confirmed. Vance told her that if she couldn't handle the workload, maybe she should explore opportunities elsewhere. I was stunned. Catherine Jones had been Northwood's nursing director for 15 years. She was respected, efficient, and never compromised on patient safety. If Vance was trying to force her out too, things were much worse than I'd thought. What's your plan? Chloe asked, her gaze fixed on me. You've got that look like you're cooking up something. I hesitated. Chloe was incredibly loyal, but getting her involved could put her job at risk. I'm weighing my options, I said carefully. The most direct way would be to go to the board with proof of these unsafe practices, but Vance has them totally convinced he's saving the hospital from financial collapse. What about the healthcare authority? Chloe suggested. An anonymous tip about safety violations would definitely trigger an investigation. I'd already thought about that, but regulatory investigations move at a snail's pace, and Vance was clever enough to cover his tracks. I needed to do something more immediate. I'm thinking I might have to tackle this from a few different angles, I said. The regulators, for sure, but also the medical staff who are worried, the patients who've noticed a decline in care, and maybe even the media. Chloe's eyebrows shot up. Going nuclear, are we? Not yet, I replied, but I'm getting ready for every possibility. What I didn't say was how angry I was. This wasn't just about me losing my job. It was about Vance completely disregarding all the work I'd done over the years to keep patients safe. He wasn't just pushing me out. He was unraveling everything that kept the hospital functioning safely. I thought about those binders in my office, the proof I'd been collecting, and I made a decision. It was time to act. A week after I was fired, I sat in a quiet corner of a cafe a few blocks from Northwood Memorial, nursing a cup of cold coffee. Across from me was Dr. Philip Vance, the chief of surgery, a guy I'd worked closely with for over a decade. "I really shouldn't be meeting with you," he said in a low voice, looking around nervously. Vance made it very clear that anyone who stays in contact with you will be seen as undermining his new direction. "And yet, here you are," I pointed out. Philip sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "What's happening isn't right, Laura. Vance is making choices that are compromising patient care, and it feels like no one can stop him." "Tell me what's changed since I left," I said, pulling out a notebook. For the next 30 minutes, Philip gave me a list of alarming new developments. Surgical teams were working double shifts, equipment maintenance had been postponed, and supplies were being rationed to the point where staff were bringing in their own basic items. What was most concerning was the new patient discharge process, which was focused on freeing up beds instead of making sure patients were actually ready to go home. "We had 3 readmissions last week because patients were discharged too early," Philip reported grimly. One was an elderly woman who was sent home without proper medication instructions. She was back in the emergency department 12 hours later, much sicker than when she left. "Are people documenting these incidents?" I asked. Philip nodded. "We're trying, but Vance has put new administrators in place who just minimize our concerns or lose the paperwork. Margaret has been keeping her own records, but she's already on thin ice." I slid a USB drive across the table. "I need you to give this to Margaret. It has templates for documenting unsafe conditions in a way that will hold up to regulatory scrutiny." Philip put the drive in his pocket. "What are you planning, Laura?" "I'm gathering evidence for the healthcare authority," I admitted. "But I need current documentation to back up the patterns I've been tracking." "You know this could ruin careers, right?" he asked. "Including yours and mine." I looked him in the eye. "What about the patients whose lives we're supposed to be protecting? How many of them will suffer because we were too scared to do anything?" Philip looked down at his coffee. "You're right. It's just intimidating. Vance has the board wrapped around his finger. He's promising financial miracles. Financial miracles usually come at a cost," I pointed out. "In this case, it's patient safety." "I'll help," Philip said finally. "But be careful. Vance is more connected than you think. His brother-in-law is on the Hospital Association board, and he's got friends at the state level." That was new and unsettling information. If Vance had allies in the very bodies that were supposed to be regulating him, my complaints might just get ignored or dismissed. As we were leaving, Philip grabbed my arm. "There's something else you should know," he said. "Vance has been telling people that you were fired for incompetence, that you mismanaged budgets and falsified staffing reports. He was essentially blaming me for the hospital's financial problems." The accusation hit me like a physical punch. Not only had I been publicly humiliated and fired, but now my professional reputation, the one I'd spent 18 years building, was being systematically destroyed. "Thanks for telling me," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. As I walked back to my car, a wave of anger washed over me, a feeling more intense than anything I'd experienced before. Vance wasn't just putting patients at risk, he was attacking my integrity and my life's work. The gloves, I decided, were officially coming off. When I got to my car, I made a new decision. It was time to involve someone I'd been hesitant to contact, David Chun, an investigative reporter for the Portland Tribune. He'd reached out to me years ago about a story on hospital administration, and I declined to comment back then. I found his card in my contacts and sent him a text. "We should talk. I have information about patient safety risks at Northwood Memorial." His response was almost immediate. "Been waiting for this call." "When and where?" David Chun was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 30s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "We met at a park far from the hospital, where I laid out my concerns about Northwood under Vance's leadership." "I've heard rumors," David admitted, with my permission to record our conversation. "Complaints about staffing, unusual turnover rates, but without someone on the inside, it's tough to verify anything." "I've got more than rumors," I told him, handing over a folder. These are redacted copies of incident reports from the last 6 months. They show a clear pattern of increased safety risks, and they line up perfectly with Vance's policy changes. David flipped through the documents, his expression getting more serious with each page. This is definitely concerning, but Vance could argue these are just isolated incidents or part of broader, industry-wide challenges. That's why I also put these together, I said, pulling out a second folder with statistical analyses. These show that while other hospitals in our region have maintained consistent safety metrics, Northwoods have plummeted since Vance arrived. David gave a low whistle. You really did your homework. 18 years of homework, I corrected him. I've been tracking these patterns through multiple administrations. The difference is that the previous directors actually listened when I presented the evidence. Vance just fired me instead. So why go public now, he asked. Why not just take this straight to the board? It was a fair question, and one I had asked myself many times. The board hired Vance specifically to cut costs, I explained. They're only focused on the financial improvements, and they don't see the safety trade-offs. And Vance has them convinced that I'm just incompetent and bitter. David nodded slowly. So you need public pressure to force their hand. Exactly, I said. Once the patients and the community know what's really happening, the board will have no choice but to act, regardless of Vance's connections. This is a solid story, David said, but you need to be ready for what's coming. Vance isn't going to just let this go. He's going to attack your credibility and your motives. He's already doing that, I pointed out. At least this way, the truth gets out there. As David packed up the documents, promising to independently verify my claims, a twinge of doubt hit me. Was I doing this for the right reasons? Was it really about patient safety, or was it about my wounded pride? The answer came when David asked one final question. What's the best case outcome for you from all of this? Without a moment's hesitation, I told him my hope was for Northwood to return to a place that prioritized safe, quality care over cutting costs. Whether I'm a part of that future or not is secondary. That evening, I got an unexpected call from Eleanor. Vance is making moves, she said without any preamble. He's been calling board members individually, telling them you're planning to sue the hospital for wrongful termination. He's saying you're fabricating all the safety concerns to strengthen your case. My stomach dropped. That's not true. I have no plans to sue. I know that, she said. But they don't. He's poisoning the well before you can even get to them. This was a move I hadn't anticipated. Vance was more strategic than I'd given him credit for. There's more, Eleanor continued. He's expediting his cost-cutting plans, trying to implement them all at once instead of gradually. It was as if he knew a storm was coming and wanted to lock in as many changes as possible. This meant he suspected I was gathering evidence. Maybe he'd been tipped off about my meeting with David, or perhaps Philip's conversation with Margaret had been discovered. What should I do? I asked, suddenly feeling completely out of my element. Stay the course, Eleanor advised, but be ready for things to get ugly. Vance is the kind of guy who built his career by never backing down and never admitting he's wrong. After we hung up, I sat in my living room, staring at the wall of evidence I had assembled. I had planned to be methodical, to build my case carefully before making it public. But Vance was accelerating his timeline, which meant I needed to accelerate mine. I texted David, "How quickly can you run the story?" The headline appeared 3 days later. Patient safety concerns plague Northwood Memorial Hospital. David had worked incredibly fast, corroborating my claims with other staff members and comparing Northwood's safety metrics to state averages. The article didn't name me as the primary source, but it did mention that recently terminated administrative staff had raised concerns. My phone began ringing almost immediately. The first call was from Margaret, the nursing director. "It's a madhouse here," she reported. Vance called an emergency meeting for all department heads. He's furious, demanding to know who talked to the press. Has he addressed any of the safety concerns? I asked. Not at all, she said. It's all about controlling the narrative and identifying the traitors. He's threatened to fire anyone found to have spoken to reporters. Next was Philip, who had a calmer perspective. The medical staff are quietly celebrating. Someone finally said what we've all been thinking. The board is in an emergency session right now. The most surprising call came from David himself. You need to turn on Channel 4 right now." I flipped on the television to see Dr. Vance standing at a podium, flanked by other hospital administrators. His expression was serious as he addressed the cameras. "The allegations printed in this morning's Tribune are completely false," he declared, his voice firm. "Northwood Memorial maintains the highest standards of patient care." He continued, saying the fabricated concerns came from a former employee who was terminated for incompetence and who was now engaged in a vendetta against this institution. He didn't use my name, but it was obvious he was talking about me, portraying me as bitter, resistant to change, and willing to damage the hospital's reputation out of spite. "We've retained legal counsel," Vance added, "and we'll be exploring our options regarding this defamatory article." I muted the TV, my heart pounding. He was publicly attacking my integrity and professionalism. "You've got him running scared," David said on the phone. "But this is just the beginning. What happens next?" I asked. "Next is when things get interesting," he replied. "The State Healthcare Authority reached out to me after the article came out. They want to see all the documentation." This was much faster than I'd anticipated. Regulatory bodies usually moved at a glacial pace, but maybe the public outcry had forced their hand. "I have copies of everything ready to go," I told him. "What about Vance's legal threats, though?" "Standard intimidation tactics," David said, dismissing my concern. "The Tribune's lawyers reviewed every word before we published. Everything is factual and properly sourced." I wasn't completely reassured. Vance had resources and connections that I didn't. While I had been meticulous with my documentation, I knew how easily facts could be twisted and how a narrative could be spun to villainize a whistleblower. Later that afternoon, I received an anonymous email from a Northwood address. "Check patient readmission reports for oncology over the last 2 months," it read. "There's a pattern of premature discharges, followed by complications." Vance personally approved the new discharge protocols despite multiple objections from oncologists. This was exactly the kind of specific, verifiable information that could significantly strengthen the case against Vance. I immediately forwarded it to David, who promised to follow up. By the evening, news vans were parked outside the hospital. The local healthcare workers' union had released a statement supporting the Tribune's investigation and demanding a full review of the hospital's safety protocols. Patient advocacy groups were also demanding answers. What had started as my private collection of documents had quickly turned into a major public reckoning. As I watched the news coverage, I felt a strange mix of vindication and anxiety. I had wanted to protect patients and hold Vance accountable, but I hadn't expected things to escalate so quickly or for the attacks to become so personal. This was no longer just about my career. It was about the future of Northwood Memorial and the safety of countless patients. And despite Vance's counteroffensive, I knew I had a powerful advantage. The truth was on my side. Underscore 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 underscore. 1 week after the Tribune article broke, the Healthcare Authority announced a formal investigation into Northwood Memorial. Inspectors arrived without warning, reviewing records, interviewing staff, and observing operations. Vance was notably absent during their 3-day visit, represented instead by nervous administrators who struggled to answer pointed questions about staffing ratios and safety protocols. I kept an eye on things from a distance, getting updates from Margaret and Philip. The investigation itself was a form of vindication, proof that my concerns were serious and warranted official attention. But I knew Vance wouldn't go down without a fight. On the 4th day, I had an unexpected visitor. Marcus Miller, the chairman of the hospital board, was standing on my doorstep, looking visibly uncomfortable. "Mr. Miller," I said, genuinely surprised to see him. "I didn't expect you here." "May I come in?" he asked, glancing nervously over his shoulder as if worried about being seen. I led him into my living room, where my wall of evidence was still on display. He stared at it for a long moment before speaking. "The board has received the preliminary findings from the Healthcare Authority," he said, his voice grave. "They're concerning. Significant safety violations, potential regulatory actions, possible fines." He paused, They specifically cited decisions made under Dr. Vance's leadership. I waited, sensing there was more to the story. We've also uncovered financial irregularities, he continued. Consulting fees paid to companies connected to Vance's family members, questionable equipment purchases from vendors where he holds an interest. This was a complete revelation. I had focused entirely on safety, not financial wrongdoing. The board has called an emergency session for tomorrow, Miller said. Vance has been placed on administrative leave, pending a full review. He then looked me directly in the eye. We'd like you to attend the meeting to discuss the next steps. I had imagined many different outcomes when I started this whole process, but getting my job back was never one of them. I just assumed my career at Northwood was over, no matter how things played out with Vance. Are you actually asking me to return? I asked, just to be sure. Miller nodded. The board knows we made a serious error in judgment, both by hiring Vance and by letting you go. Your knowledge of how this hospital really works is exactly what we need right now. The board meeting was tense. It was clear the members were divided on what to do. Some, including Miller, acknowledged they'd made a mistake with Vance. Others were still defensive, suggesting the problems had been exaggerated. Vance himself wasn't there. His lawyer just made vague statements about differences in management philosophy and misunderstandings about policy changes. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't just lay out the safety concerns. I presented my vision for fixing them. This included bringing back proper nurse-to-patient ratios, resuming regular equipment maintenance, and setting up a system of checks and balances to prevent patient care from being compromised in the future. These aren't radical suggestions, I stressed. They're standard practices that Northwood successfully followed for years before the recent changes. Yes, they have costs, but so do readmissions, complications, and regulatory fines. The debate went on for hours, but by the end of the meeting, the board had come to several decisions. First, Dr. Vance's employment was terminated, effective immediately. Second, I would be reinstated as the senior hospital administrator with a new, expanded role overseeing safety compliance. Third, an independent audit would review all policy changes from the past 6 months, with any that compromised patient care being reversed right away. As the meeting wrapped up, David Chen's story hit the Tribune's online edition. Healthcare Authority confirms safety violations at Northwood, director removed. The article detailed not just the safety concerns, but also the financial irregularities that had been discovered during the investigation. Walking out of the boardroom, I felt a complex mix of emotions: satisfaction that patient safety would be a priority again, relief that my professional reputation was vindicated, but also a sober awareness that many relationships and a lot of trust would need to be rebuilt. Margaret met me in the hallway, a tentative smile on her face. "Welcome back," she said simply. "There's a lot of work to do," I replied. "Yes," she agreed, "but this time we'll do it right." In the weeks that followed, I led the implementation of systemic changes at Northwood. We brought back appropriate staffing levels, reinstated essential safety protocols, and established transparent reporting systems for all safety concerns. The Healthcare Authority's final report outlined 27 significant violations under Vance's leadership, which resulted in substantial fines, but more importantly, provided a clear roadmap for improvement. Vance, facing professional disgrace and potential legal issues related to the financial improprieties, left Portland completely. I heard he had taken a position at a private healthcare consultancy in another state, a concerning development, but one that was out of my control. As for me, I found myself more committed to Northwood's mission than ever before. The whole experience had reminded me why I had gotten into healthcare administration in the first place, not for power or prestige, but to ensure that patients receive the safe, quality care they deserved. 1 year after my early retirement and subsequent return, I stood in the hospital lobby, unveiling a new patient safety initiative. Looking at the assembled staff, many of whom had risked their jobs to speak out about unsafe conditions, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. My meticulous documentation had provided the ammunition, but their courage had made victory possible. We had transformed a potential tragedy into an opportunity for renewal, proving that sometimes the best revenge isn't punishment, but reform.